Hello, I'm Maya Andreessen, and today we are going to go over the interface of Substance Painter and introduce you to how you can navigate and work within the program. I'm going to turn off my camera so that you don't see my face covering up any part of the interface. So let's get started right now. Okay, so you see here a box model that we will be working on, and I'm going to take you through the steps of how you would import the model and how you would bake the textures. But I just kind of wanted to show you what the model looks like after the bake before we get started. So there's a couple things that you need to do prior to importing your FBX files into Substance Painter. You need to set up your models properly in whatever 3D software you're using, whether it be Maya or Max. And I go over those steps in the video previous to this, which goes over how to create a color ID map. One of the other things that you need to remember, though, is if you have a high and low poly model, which I do in this case, I have a low poly box and I have a high poly version of it as well, and that's where all the detail comes in. I transferred that high poly information, it's called baking, onto the low poly model as 2D maps. And in order to make sure the baking is done properly, you need to make sure that both your high and low poly models are in the same space. So it doesn't matter really where they're located in Maya or Max or Blender or 3D or Cinema 4D or whatever 3D program you're using, but wherever that model is, the low and high poly models need to be in the exact same space, both in the X, Y, and Z axis. If they're not, then you will have strange offsets and your bakes will not happen properly. So you need to make sure that is number one. Okay. Number two, in terms of naming, you're going to want to make sure that if you have a low and high poly model, that the naming is the same, and the only thing that is different is the suffix. So in this case, this is low underscore box and high underscore box. All right, so let's get started. So first thing I'm going to go is when you open the Substance Painter interface, you have your main menu up here, and we're going to go to File, New. And I am going to select my file. Now, FBX files are better to use than OBJs. You can use an OBJ file. The issue with using an OBJ, though, is if you have softened any normals on your model in whatever 3D program you're using. So let's say you selected some edges and you're like, I'm going to sharpen these edges and I'm going to soften these edges. And then you export it as an OBJ. Unfortunately, when you import it into Substance is not going to recognize the softened edges. And so your normal maps will bake and you'll see all of the faces basically of the model in those bakes, which you don't want usually. So the best thing to do is to export from, and in this case I used Maya, exported from Maya as an FBX. And I'm going to now import into Substance as an FBX file. So I'm going to select box 3 low. You can tell I've done this a couple times. And then under project settings, you want to select your document resolution. I'm going to go with 2K here, 2048 by 2048. And my normal map format is going to be DirectX. There's also OpenGL, but we're going to choose DirectX. And really, DirectX and OpenGL, they are referenced when you use different game engines. So whether you're going to use Unity or Unreal, that's when you'd really have to worry about whether it's DirectX or OpenGL. Um, and then I actually have something called a color ID map. And once again, if you watched that previous video, you would have seen the steps to creating a color ID map. And we are going to click add here. So you have this option here to import mesh normal maps and baked maps for all materials. So if I had previous normal maps, I can import them. If I had other color maps, I can import them. In this case, I have a color ID map. So I'm going to go to my source images folder here, and it's color ID 3, and I'm going to open it up and click OK. And we'll discard this. Okay, so here is my low poly box. All right, and as we can see, I'm moving around. Now the way you move around in your 3D space is the same as how you move around in Maya. Alt left mouse press allows you to rotate, Alt middle mouse press to pan, and Alt right mouse press to zoom in and out. If you hit Control, Alt, and left mouse press, you can actually snap to the closest orthographic view. So that's pretty cool. So once again, that's Shift, Alt, left mouse press. So if you ever wanted to just, let's say, I want to see the top view, Shift, Alt, left mouse press. Now I don't know if you've noticed, but there's also, if you press Shift, a pop-up here that gives you a bunch of keyboard shortcuts, and that's really helpful. Also, if you hit Control, that will also pop up a whole menu of keyboard shortcuts. So both Alt and Shift do, so both Shift and Control do that, and it's very handy. Alt also does, brings up another pop-up that shows keyboard shortcuts. So Alt, this deals more with camera shortcuts. Control deals with opening projects, saving, undoing, redoing, and things of that nature. And Shift shows you how to display things, rotate the environment, snap the camera, all sorts of other options there. Okay, so here on the left is the main menu, and will be, or a toolbar rather, it's not the main menu, it's a toolbar. The main menu is up at the top. And we're going to go into the settings after we bake our maps. So we're going to go over here to texture set settings. You'll notice there's a number of windows here. You can actually grab the windows and move them around. You can change where they're located. You can do all sorts of fun things. And then if you want to reset everything, you can go to both windows, where you can go to views, display settings, right? You go to toolbars, reset, hide UI, and reset UI. So now my UI is reset. This is my 3D view. This is my 2D view, which displays my UVs. All right, so I'm going to go over to texture set settings, and I'm going to make it a little bit bigger so you can see it a little bit better. And I'm going to go to this option, Bake Mesh Maps. I'm going to click it, and it's going to open up this window. Under output size, I'm going to change it to 2048. Now, if you are only working on one model that does not have a high poly counterpart, then what you can do is you can check on use low poly mesh as high poly mesh. And you're going to want to do this because you need to bake maps. If you don't bake your maps, you won't be able to create normal map, create a height map, create your diffuse map properly. Now, we do have a high poly version of the box, and so I'm going to keep this option, use low poly mesh as high poly mesh, unchecked. And under high definition meshes, I'm going to click the little piece of paper that's folded in the right hand corner, and that's going to take me into my project folders here where I can go to scenes, and I can select box 3 high. Now you'll notice that the boxes are named exactly the same, and the only difference is the suffix. One is high, one is low. I mentioned that before. Now the reason why that's important is you can go under match here and match by mesh names. Now I have had some issues with this in the past, and where my bakes haven't turned out correctly. If that occurs, simply rebake your textures and choose always, and I've never had an issue with my textures baking when I did that. And so now I click bake textures, and we can see all my maps being created and formed. They're looking good. When you're done, click OK. And this is the box that you saw when I started this video. Okay, so I have now taken all that information and created it. Now, I actually already have a color ID map, so I clicked the X next to the color ID. I should have unchecked it, I didn't. So I'm going to select an ID map, and here is my color ID map that I imported previously. And that is important.